Thank you very much, Sharon. That's a lovely intro. And then when she say 20 years, I'm like, oh no, I forgot to send her a note. She should only say 2 years. This just Amy tremendously sitting around these lovely lady. So I am very excited to have the conversation with Alice, Cassie, and Christine. I have to say, once I look up at some of the stuff that you guys have done, I am so impressed and very hopeful. I'm hopeful as a Canadian, and I'm hopeful as a Asian minorities woman in this country. So with that, let's get into this. As Sharon said, this will be a fireside chat conversation. But I always felt that having those interactive conversations with the audience is always make the conversations a lot more interesting. So I encourage you all to please put your comment and question into chat, and then Sharon's will kindly nudge me if I don't see it. So why don't we start with Alice? Because Alice, I had watched that CTV interview and I was blown away by the work that you do. We're definitely going to get to the good neighbor piece. But I am dying to know also about the work that you're doing in Chinatown. There's some really exciting things, and I don't want to steal her thunder. So I'd love to know about some of the work that you're starting doing in Chinatown.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I always love meeting young entrepreneurs, and I think it's a really interesting way for us to kind of talk about how, as business owners and as community members, that we can continue to focus on allyship and raising the voices of a neighborhood like Chinatown, because sometimes the more we can do as individuals and each in our own networks and each in our own little spheres, the greater impact that we can have. And as most of you know, Chinatowns across North America are at risk of gentrification, at risk of disappearing every day. And I found out about this through Teresa, who's on here, in 2016. She was like, do you know that, there's this huge development that is risking the long-term survival of Chinatown? Like, if it's passed, there's going to be lots of issues and it's going to set a precedent. And really, it's not going to add much value to the neighborhood. It's just increasing the zoning value. And it's, again, going to remain as an empty lot, right? And I was like, I had totally at that point taken Chinatown for granted, because I grew up, born and raised in Calgary. My parents lived in Chinatown. I was living in Chinatown until I was 2 years old in low-income housing at Beauside Manor, which is a building in Calgary. And I just always took for granted that it was always going to be there. I was like, this is the place that we go on the weekends. This is the place that we go for Chinese school. But I made an assumption, just like many people, that this neighborhood was secure and that nothing would be able to jeopardize it, until somebody like Teresa raised these points about how actually quickly it can happen and what apathy could result in. And so right away, I started volunteering with Teresa. We formed the Chinatown Task Force, and it was my first foray into any sort of political lobbying. It was my first foray into really learning about the planning process and how it was very prejudiced towards the Chinatown community. At that time, many of the councillors were very sensitive to the word racism, but they were being extremely racist towards the needs and the views of Chinatown residents, and they weren't following their own policies. And I think that for me, somebody who's naturally interested in community building and in urban planning, it was a shock to me that how little I knew and how ignorant I was at the process, let alone the greater Calgary community. So I met a lot of the people who are on this call today. I met through that process and really ingrained a long-term commitment to Chinatown and how important it is for it to survive, because I learned so much about the history of the neighborhood, how it was built. A lot of people make assumptions that Chinatowns are kind of like gifted to the community, like a councillor or a mayor decided, oh, we declare this Chinatown. And that's just simply not the case, right? Like, it was built on the back of pioneers who came to this community for over 100 years. And so my friends and I started volunteering for a group called I Love YYC Chinatown. And we decided to start doing Chinatown tours to really educate, our contemporaries, people who are young professionals, on the history of Chinatown, so that they too don't take it for granted and that they can learn more. I believe that the more information that you have, just kind of like our reconciliation journey, the more you understand it, the more you can do about it, right? And the more you can become an advocate and an ally. And so we've been doing tours since 2016. They've always been lots of fun. We've learned a lot about it. And then in my day job, as a commercial property manager, I do quite a bit of leasing. And so in recent times, there's been people who are a lot older who are renting these buildings that are like asking me for help, right? Like, how can we lease out our spaces, even temporarily? Like, we don't have budget to hire like an actual real estate person to help. We also don't speak English that well to be able to like tour people. We don't know what people want. We don't know what market rates are. And so in the past year, I've been really trying to introduce people more to Chinatown as a viable neighborhood to start your business. Obviously, it helps if you are of Chinese background, but I think what's more important than that is to lease spaces to people who are allies for the community. And so for the folks who opened Paper Lantern, which is like a really popular new cocktail bar, the hip new cool thing in Chinatown, I was like, we have to do a Chinatown tour, right? Like, I need you guys to understand what the neighborhood has gone through. Same thing for Boo, which is a new vintage store that's opened in the Chinese National League building. It was a hall that was vacant. It was built in the 60s, used as a community gathering space for many years. And then unfortunately, like, every board member is in their 80s, 90 years old, absentee. It's just been vacant, and they're at risk of shutting down because they don't have enough money to cover like the property taxes, the expenses in the building, right? And so we showed it to different people in my network who owned vintage stores, and they were like, this would be perfect. It's like such a cool location. It's kind of a secret, kind of a secrets of Chinatown kind of vibe. And so it was really great to see in the past few years that there's been a lot more interest in Chinatown from my generation. And I think a big key part of it is literally having somebody like me or like Patrick or Ansel, or the folks who are like volunteers, young professionals who kind of act like a bridge between the older population in Chinatown and the kind of like greater Calgary community, to say, hey, if you want to come in here, this is the way to do it. This is how you do it respectfully. And these are our values. And this is why it's important for you to understand and to follow it. And so, we opened Good Neighbor really close to Chinatown. It's not within the Chinatown boundaries, but many of our clients are Chinese. And so I've gotten to know a lot of them because I'm the only one who speaks, or not the only one, but the one who's like happy to speak Cantonese with people when they come in the door, and some really bad Mandarin. And it's been really cool to like get to know them, right? And that's where you again learn where the shortfalls in Chinatown right now that make it so that these folks don't have enough to have a good standard of living, right? Like, the lineup that we have for food is super long. The lineup that we have for clothing, they're constantly trying to figure out how to get into affordable housing. And the big thing that sucks is like, we have lots of units of affordable housing nearby, but they don't know how to fill out the paperwork, right? And sometimes it's like, they're not going to ask how to do it. For many years, we had nonprofits in Calgary or in Chinatown helping people with that exact thing. I think there is a resurgence and a desire to move back into Chinatown to help fill some of these gaps and bridge, because a lot of people just cannot afford to live in market housing anymore, especially as a senior. So it's helped me, again, get to know the neighborhood better and get to know what kind of things I need to advocate for the neighborhood to make it livable and great. And so, a shameless plug, Dale's on this call today. This week, there's actually going to be a Calgary Chinatown tour and also a dinner led by Dale Kwong, who is a Chinatown expert, grew up here, huge advocate as well. And so I'll put the link to the tickets if anybody is interested, but that's on Friday night. And I think that just having opportunities like that to welcome people back into Chinatown, because the pandemic was really rough, it was really hard for a lot of the businesses. And we're trying to help Chinatown kind of regain this, it's super cool. There's lots of interesting businesses. You just have to learn about them, but also trying to get the city to recognize it as one of the most age-friendly communities in all of Calgary. It's a place where seniors can age well, go to the doctors, maintain their independence, make friends, have that social stability. So, when people are like, wow, Chinese people live for a long time, it's like, because we have this village, right, for them. And so, through my job and through everything that I do, I think it's not just about like, oh, on Tuesdays, I care about Chinatown. It's like within every facet of my life, right? Because I don't want it to go away, and I don't want it to be in 20 years like, oh, remember when Calgary had a Chinatown for 100 years and then it's gone and now it's just office towers or something? Like, that would just be so sad. And the last thing that I will mention is that there's a lot of people who say, well, aren't Chinatowns like out of trend now? Like, people live in the suburbs, like you have suburban Asian areas, like you don't need Chinatown anymore. And it's like, yes, there should be cultural diversity and ethnicities in all of Calgary, everywhere. It shouldn't matter. But Chinatown, when I hear that, it just means that we have more work to do because people don't understand the cultural and historical significance of this community. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, if I can get a wow for that. I heard so much passions in your voice. And I think this is the kind of thing make me hopeful to be a Canadian again. And make me really hopeful that by the time I retire, my pensions will be quite safe in the hand of the next generations of leaders. So kudos to you for all the great work that you do. And I absolutely hear you, right? From the East Coast to the West Coast, there are Chinatown across this land. And they plays a huge part in Canadian history. And we tend to be overlooked. When I was part of a bigger banks, there was so much backlash against the Asian community at the beginning of the pandemic. And a group of us tried to lobby really hard to try to find some of the lending solutions for a business owner in this Chinatown, because all the business was impacted and it's highly cash driven kind of business. And yet we didn't get that support. So I definitely want to get to some of those solutions, but I also love to hear a little bit more from you, Alice, before I get over to Christy and Cassie on these piece. Is that, and I definitely think that's not a plug. I think folks all should raise hand and support you in this. I love to know what are some of the advice you may want to give to folks on this call, or maybe folks that's not on this call, but these folks can spread the word. What other things that people in the community, in Asian community across Canada can do to help support the revitalizations of Chinatown? I definitely don't think it's out of fashion. How can it be? It's a part of Canadian fabric and parts of our history, but it's how, right? So love to know some of your thought on that, and what would you say to some of those folks out there who want to get involved, help? What is the place that they can start?
Yeah, I would say that something that we found back in 2016 was like when we were in the news, when Chinatown was in the news, it seemed like people were just very apathetic about it, like they just didn't have enough understanding and vocabulary, and you're kind of in shock. You're like, I don't know how to help, but that seems like it's happening in a silo. So I'm gonna just like ignore it and hope somebody else fixes it. And that's the whole thing with building community, is that you can't just wait for somebody else to fix it. I think everybody has their unique way of participating in activism, whether it's sharing an article or just coming down to Chinatowns and shopping and getting to know the business owners and bringing your friends and, choosing it as a destination. Like when we're talking about equity building, like businesses in Chinatown need way more of our business and a leg up than any other area in, 17th Avenue businesses don't really need that. Right. And I think that voting with your wallet is really important, but actually voting is super important, like participating in the municipal election process, and even provincial and federal, right? Like whether it's through cultural funding, whether it's through old age security or affordable housing funding through the federal government, and locally, making sure that you're voting for councillors, whether you live in the ward that Chinatowns exist in or not. What is their plan to make sure that there is a culturally diverse plan and sustainability for Chinatowns, right? Like they're happy to show up at the banquets, but then when it comes to voting on things, they don't actually, fight for our community. And so that's really annoying. And it does take work, and it's not simple. And you are going to get a lot of people who are saying, no, I'm not interested in it right now. But what I've found is that being consistent and being vocal about it, even if people said no to me 3 years ago, they're saying yes to me now. They're like knocking on my door being like, remember when you told us about the tours? Like, I want to take one now. How do we do that? And we're kind of piggybacking off of a really important social justice movement in North America, right? With the BLM movement, and people really recognizing, right, what is allyship and what does it mean amongst different BIPOC communities, right? Like when we in Chinatown, there was some there's definitely, when you're of a different generation, there were some people who really didn't feel comfortable talking about Indigenous reconciliation or talking about Black Lives Matters. And how does it impact me? And it's like, well, nothing will move forward if we're not doing it all together, right? Like it's not like a race Olympics. And we don't want to fall into the model minority myth where it's like, oh, we're quiet and we're docile and we don't fight for anything. So hopefully we'll be accepted and, not ruffle any feathers. But I think that it's actually done a disservice to us by being silent, and people don't see us as allies and they don't want to work with us, right? And it's changing slowly as we talk more and more about it. And there's lots of great, like the new gallery in Calgary is really about allyship and reconciliation. And so it's been really cool to have those conversations with their board members and their artists and their staff about how we train people to understand why it's so important. It's definitely something that Patrick and I talk about a lot in our tours now. Like, you know, in 2016, I definitely didn't have the vocabulary and the education on how to really talk about it and why it's important. But now it's become so important in our tours. Like even when I'm doing class tours for grade 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s, I talk about allyship. And you know, it's really important. So it can start at any age. There's no perfect timing. It's kind of like getting married. Like you never know, like just go for it. Like you just have to start somehow. And it is like paying attention. Like don't just scroll your phone on social media, like really look, the onus is on you as an individual and as a part of being a good citizen to really look at what your neighbors are facing and dealing with. And so for anybody who's listening on the call today, I know a lot of us are already activists because I recognize so many of your names, but you know, activist doesn't have to be a bad word. And it just means that you're standing up for something that's important to you and your community. So, you know, start small and start educating yourself.
I love that. I love the fact that you are saying, reinforcing the idea of you have to build these value into your day to day. It had to be consistent with something you do and evolve with that, right? So definitely so many great things to see. So I will actually bring in Cassie and Christine, because I think you opened up on model minority, and it's an interesting thing that I think had been around for quite some time. So I'm sure folks on this call know what model minorities and what it's all stand for. Cassie and Christy, if you haven't seen their shops, actually had a sticker with that. And the sticker that my kid loved from your shop, if you can believe it, she said the best sticker that you guys have is the one that said, disappointing child of a tiger mom. I took offense to it. I'm like, how could it be? So I love to know a little bit about you, and I absolutely love your product, by the way. It's amazing, very original, very authentic, and I can see the influence of your upbringing and the culture shining through. I love to know from your perspective, as you know, model minority, you have a sticker for it. What's your view on that? And what are some of the things that you would like to share with the group here about how can we encourage folks in our community to speak up, because Asians tend to be, and I draw it right into this model minority here, we tend to be on the quiet side. Like I initially at the early part of my career found it extremely difficult to object to my supervisors when they give me directions. Now I have to do it as part of my job, but it was difficult for me at the beginning. So how do we change some of these things around? How can we help our community to speak up more? So
yeah, I'll answer that. Well, first, thank you for having us on here. And I just want to say, listening to Alice talk, like I wish we could clone you and bring you to Vancouver, because so much of I was actually born and raised in Calgary. I lived there for like the first 22 years of my life. My grandma lives in Chinatown and one of the senior centers there. I'm super familiar with that area. Many evenings after the bar eating food there. So I've spent time there, and it's so great to hear the work that you're doing down there, because you're right. I think it is an area that's taken advantage of. People just sort of assume it will be there. And we've seen just how devastating the pandemic has been in Vancouver. Our Chinatown in Vancouver is really just like hanging on by a thread. And it's really sad to see. And I think, many of the things that you've talked about are even more challenging and prevalent in Vancouver, and don't quite know what the answer is. There is no quick fix. And you're right, it just sort of takes a lot of activism and involvement every day, kind of on a constant basis. And so while we're not as involved in the community in the same way, I think our small part of it, like our way of being an activist and being active in this cause, is through our business, through our art, through the things that we design. Specifically about model minority, I think what we have to remember is that we're not a monolith, and the model minority is essentially trying to say that that we're kind of all the same, this particular stereotype. And I think one of the best ways that we can all move towards breaking free of that is to become whole people, to share our whole story, to be unique individuals, and to present that loudly and proudly, or quietly, and in the subtle ways. I think there is sort of we don't all have to be loud, and it's okay to be quiet, and I think by saying that, we're not part of the model minority is basically saying, like, I am not just one thing. I am my person, I am me, and that should be celebrated as well. So I think in terms of asking how our community can sort of break free of that, it's really just encouraging all of us to kind of look within, to honor experiences, to just be the people that we are in whatever way that shows up. I think something that's so damaging is that we're often trying, I think as first generations, we sort of have this like tenuous relationship with like the culture we come from and the culture that we live in. And it's often like sort of a waffling and moving back and forth between being like not Asian enough or being too Asian. And I think there is no right answer. There's no perfect answer. Like all the answers are correct. Like you cannot speak Cantonese and still be Asian, or you could speak like perfect Mandarin and still be Asian. You could hate dim sum and still be Asian, and I think as more of us share that and be proud of that, I think the less that we will be kind of like falling into this model minority idea.
Thank you so much. How about you, Christine? And by the way, no one can hate dim sum. I'm sorry. It's delicious food. Okay.
Just to add what Cassie has said already, a lot of it, I just constantly have to remind myself to speak up when the opportunity arises. It's to squash stereotypes, or whether to just share experiences. And I think that's really important as well, because, I've got kids, and I do want to share what, my parents have shared with me, their upbringing and their immigration story to Vancouver. They first immigrated to and lived in the Chinatown here in Vancouver. And I think that's important for my kids to learn and know where they come from, and share our family experiences. And through our business, our design and illustrations, we definitely want to reflect our upbringings and how what we've experienced growing up. For example, the dim sum puzzle. It's, there's a certain image of it that's not portrayed when you Google it online, like a dim sum puzzle. And we definitely want to put our own artistic flair on it. But, there's many different ways to look at things. And so definitely sharing is key.
Thank you so much, Christine. I actually just checking the chat room that someone had shared a question, which actually aligned perfectly with the next question I was going to have for Alice, Cassie, and Christine. I think all three of you have accomplished something really unique and really difficult for a lot of us. For Alice, how does she rally a whole host of people behind her for all these charity work that she's doing and amazing stuff that she's doing for the community and her day job? So that's Superwoman. And then Cassie and Christine, like there are so much challenges to start a business from the ground up. So my hat is off to all three of you for accomplish these amazing stuff. So my question to you, and I think our friends in the chat, Jessica had alluded to, is that how do you overcome those challenges? And I'll pass it first to Alice, and maybe Cassie and Christine can share your experience. I'm sure there must be some obstacle along your way, but how do you find that courage to stand up every day and do what you do and keep moving on?
Oh my gosh, I think it's definitely for me, like seeing others continuing to do it and in different levels. And I think that the comment about we are all unique is really important, right? Because we can all participate in a different way and it all has impact. Like I'd rather have 100 people who are just like knowledgeable about what it is and willing to kind of talk to their friends and neighbors about it, rather than like, 100 people picketing out at front, right? Like it's all about embodying it into our daily activism or our daily persona or whatever. Like it's what makes me, you know? And I think that some of the obstacles in the beginning, it was exactly what I talked about earlier. Like people just didn't care. Like they kind of similar to me, like took it for granted. And because if they weren't from a Chinese background, they didn't really see the importance in it at that time. And if they were a Chinese background, there was a lot of like kind of, unfortunately, a lot of fragility and a lot of not wanting to understand it and care about it. And there's a lot of apathy. And it just like, unfortunately, when I saw that, I was just like, this is just from years of people just not talking about it enough or making it mainstream enough or, you know, acceptable to be civically engaged. Like I remember when I first moved back to Calgary in 2014, I really wanted to volunteer and be a part of stuff. And it was difficult to have that conversation even with my parents. You know, now they're like, oh, Alice, she's so good at volunteering. Like she's on the cover of a magazine for volunteering. Like now they're so proud, but it took like other people telling them that it was cool, that they were like, oh, okay, that is cool. But, you know, in 2014, they were like, stop wasting your time, you know, like help yourself before you can help other people. And it was like having that conversation with my parents who were like refugees, you know, like boat people survival mode. Like all they know is kind of, capitalistic kind of white supremacist lensed type of standard of living. Like they're not bad people. It's just that that's what they've like been ingrained and taught to do in order to survive. And they dealt with tons of racism and tons of inequity, but it's something that they would rather just not acknowledge. You know, it's like, you're kind of like, if I acknowledge it, then it becomes truth. And then there's like this self-loathing and this self-pity. And so even for me in the past, like 5 years, like having kind of, that's been an interesting byproduct of this is like, how do I even have this conversation with my parents? And this is where I was really grateful to the AAPI community, like around North America, because when BLM happened, there was like this movement of people talking about racism and talking about why BLM matters to Chinese community, you know, like letters to my parents. I don't know if you saw that, where they translated like letters in 40 languages so that you could just like show your parents and help them read it and understand in their own language. Because a lot of kids who are first generation, sometimes you don't even have those communication skills with your parents, right? Like it's like a broken English kind of family dynamic. And so even me being able to speak fluently with my parents, I still didn't have the vocabulary to talk about racism and systemic inequity and stuff like that. And I was so grateful to have examples and movies that came out and, you know, things that talked about it. I think that it's really, in 2016, after council decided to vote in favor of the development, regardless of like the literally like hundreds of people that we had marching on the stairs and like submitting. And what for me really made an impact was like, as we were doing the public hearing and speaking in front of council, it was sad to me that like, damn, we're still fighting for this stuff every decade. Like these people who are speaking today have been speaking since the 60s. You know, like in front of council, trying to fight for their rights. And it's like, it's not cluing in. And this is where it is systemic, right? Like you're not changing how the system works. So the same problems keep existing. And I was like, I'm not like, that can't last forever. Like I refuse to be the one standing here in 10 years, you know, like it has to be different people, but the systems also have to change. And I just, even though we felt so defeated, we continued on and it was appealed. And then it was, you know, we were successful in the appeal, and that was like a little spark of hope, you know, and to see that people are still a part of it, still fighting for it at different levels, using different techniques, has been inspiring. And like, I don't want it to stop, you know, because for me, it's a part of my values. Like it wasn't a trend thing, you know, where it's like performative activism, where it's like, oh, okay, well, it's over now, so I'm going to take down my black square and just go back to my life or whatever. This is my life. And I'm grateful for the volunteers that I've met along the way that continue pushing us towards that goal, and like who aren't afraid to speak up and who do come together and rally when we need them to. So yeah.
I love that message. Gotta keep trying, right? Cassie and Christine, I see you come off mic.
Yeah. I can start off our answer. Starting up a business, I have to say, I'm so grateful to have Cassie as a friend and business partner. We motivate each other. So it's really helpful, especially when we're going through highs and lows. One of us will be in a high, the other will be in a low, and we can help lift each other up. One of the biggest challenges is trying to figure out what we design, what we create, while also doing something that we love and that's authentic to ourselves. It's a fine balance to figure out. However, it's really nice when you get feedback from customers telling you what you like. And ever since we launched our Asian themed goods, it's been a really, really welcome I guess support and love, in terms of there are people who do like the things that we love as well. And it's nice because the Asian themed goods are drawn from a lot of our upbringing, our own experiences, and stories our parents have told us. Cassie, is there anything else you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say our Asian themed stuff is doing really well right now. So I mean, I would love to say like, oh yeah, we knew from the moment that we designed it, it was going to be a big hit, but that's not true at all. Like that's actually a total lie, because we had no idea how well it was going to do. It was something we kind of had to take a leap of faith on, which is sort of a really silly thing to say about something you want to design kind of for yourself in an authentic way. And a big part of that is like the industry we're in is really, it's really white focused. I mean, you walk into any Hallmark, like 90% of the items are for a white audience. And I think we really underestimated just how many people out there are like us, who just simply were not given a choice to buy something different. So we all just sort of like, yeah, Hallmark is cool, okay. And it wasn't until I think more people use their voices to show that there could be different options that you're like, oh, actually, yeah, this is great too. There's other people that share my experiences or my sense of humor, and why hasn't this always been around? And it's been really quite revelatory, I have to say. Like Alice mentioned, with like Black Lives Matter and just this whole, just like, I just don't think the world was ready like 3 years ago. Like, to be honest, I think if we had released any of our Asian themed goods 3 years ago, it would have been crickets. Like, I just don't think many of us were sort of in the place to love ourselves, like to love our culture and to like be happy to celebrate it and to spend money on it. I just think we weren't ready. So it's like a little bit of timing, but also kind of like many of us like reckoning with our trauma and with our past and kind of like with our culture and being ready to face it. And so I think in terms of like challenges and how we kind of keep moving, it's for us in our business is to have an authentic business, right? To have our work reflect the people that we are in an honest and meaningful way. We constantly are trying to not just do something because it's going to make us money, or to just not do something because we know it's going to be popular. It can be challenging sometimes when you're running a business because you want to make money. Like, that is a part of it too, right? But we are constantly having conversations about, is what we're designing something we feel good about, something that represents us, and something that is for the audience that we're trying to reach. And I think, kind of tying back to the model minority thing, it's starting a business is not really easy as a first generation adult, in that our parents are like, get a university degree, get a stable job, like make an income, so to kind of go off and start a business in something that they may not necessarily understand, like telling my mother that I design greeting cards for a living is like, okay, like, do you make money from that? Like, I think that can be really challenging too, is that we have this sort of self-imposed limits about like the career paths that we can follow. And it's not always easy to break free from that, which is also a bit ironic because I think so many immigrants are like these crazy entrepreneurs who do start businesses to feed their families. And so that's like, there's like a bit of irony in that. Although, I mean, I do understand, like, they came here for a better life, to give us a better life. They don't want to see us struggle. And a big part of entrepreneurship is struggle. So I think if we continue to see more and more businesses run by the BIPOC community, I think that will also help to sort of tear down some of those stereotypes and to encourage, again, like us to be unique whole beings who are interested in more than just a stable career path and following like a predetermined number of steps as you go through life.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, as you and Alice and Christine were sharing these, I actually reflect a lot about my life. So I'm a first generation immigrant, and my family was boat people that went to the Hong Kong route and end up here. So I know quite a bit about what Alice is sharing about being refugees and why the parent thinks the way they think. When I told my mom that I want to join the army after high school, you just can imagine the kind of thing she said to me. So tiger mom apparently is also heretic. It does pass on every generation. But I think you all touch on a very unique point, right? We want to live authentically to who we are and how we feel. But our parents, our community, the people around us, and the value that they have do have an impact on all of us. And I don't know if all of us have the strength that all three of you have this place to say, I will pursue my passion and I will not listen to my parent because I only listen to my mother, hence I'm a banker. But I would love to see more young people trying what you, Cassie and Christine do, trying out a new business that will make a difference, will bring a smile to everyone's face. Or Alice passionately pursued something that she thinks is right for the community, may not bring in tons of cash, but it will change the community. So I would love to hear from your perspective as well on that topic of what are some advices you think you can give to some of the folks here, because I'm sure all of you guys probably have one or two tiger parents somewhere. How do you bridge that communication gap? Because at the end of the day, we still want to have that family relations. We want our parents to feel happy and proud of what we do, but at the same time, leave us so that we can live our life in an authentic way, that maybe pursuing career that not so much in their view, but right for you. So open it up. See who want to start on that conversation.
I want to say I was so excited to see Cassie and Christine on this panel because like Asian artists are so underrepresented, especially in Canada's like market. Like they're perfectly right. Like every graphic design firm, creative agency, like there's just not a huge amount of creatives that are from like any BIPOC. It's like very white at this point. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that like a lot of kids were not allowed to go to art school, they were not, they had to go to engineering, do whatever, right? Like it's despite their passion. Now, what has been interesting like about social media and things like TikTok is that, and WhatsApp and people blowing up on the internet is like Asian parents like love viral stuff, almost like it's bad almost because they're like, oh yeah, film, like if your video goes viral, then you're valued as like an artist or like as a musician or whatever, right? And it's this weird way, but I think that it was healing for a lot of like young artists, like people, now my cousins that are younger than me, they're 6 or 7 years younger than me, like their parents have a different perspective of it than my parents. My parents were still of the generation that was like, go to business school, go to law school, like, have a stable job, get the house in the suburbs, like be safe, right? And now they're like, okay, well, I think as parents become more, especially the ones who were lower income in the beginning, but now are more in the middle income kind of range, you're like, okay, well, you can take a little bit of risk, but what I've heard from a lot of parents is like, oh, I just want my kid to be like consistent with something, and so I think for me, it was like, volunteering is not going away in my life. I was very consistent with it. And I still showed them it's like, yeah, I can fall, I can make mistakes, but I can also take care of myself, and like helping them see that it wasn't something that was just in the moment or something that, I was going to give up on really quickly, help them see why it's important and bringing them into it as well, like inviting them and, not doing it as a silo, like inviting them to the different events or like taking the time to educate them consistently over a long period of time, like helped a little bit, And then of course, like, yeah, my parents at least like care very much about what other people think. So like using that, like I reached out to their friends and told them about what I was doing in Chinatown, and they thought that was cool, you know, and it got back to my parents. Right. So, that was just like my own unique perspective. But I think for any young person, like it definitely hurts to go against the grain of what your parents want or intended for you. But sometimes you just have to do it if it's something that you're truly really passionate about, or it's something that you can't stop thinking about because you don't want to live a life of regrets, you know, like you just got to go for it. And if it doesn't work, great, you go and try something else. Like it doesn't really matter. But I wouldn't like, I've met so many people who are like, oh, I'm in my 40s now and I'm in my professional career and I hate it. But it's too late. Like I can't exit. And it's just not true. Like people pivot and change all the time. And I think that sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Like we make up excuses for ourselves to make it so that we don't have to take the plunge. But, you know, I think I'm a big risk taker. So I'm like, just go for it, you know, even if it pisses your parents off, because they love you and they are your biggest cheerleaders. And even if it means not talking for like 6 months, which they will not be able to do, like you're going to be fine.
Okay, 6 months is a long time. And for mom, you just give us a heart attack.
My dad went, the longest my dad has gone is 1 month. So
I know Teresa is sitting there thinking, oh gosh, is my kid thinking that way? Over to you, Cassie and Christine. Perhaps you can share your perspective on that too.
Sure. I would say I was pretty lucky. My dad did consulting, so he kind of struck out on his own too. So I was pretty lucky. My mom doesn't really understand what I do, but she's not really against it, which I think is like pretty fortunate. Like I don't think either of my parents really felt like so adamantly against anything I've ever done. So I feel like I'm really quite lucky in that regard. Like my parents, you know, they moved here when they were like 18 or 19. So I feel like they also absorbed a lot of like Western thinking when it came to raising my brother and I. I think like it was kind of like what Al said. It's just like they just want you to be safe. And so really like the bottom line of it all, it's like I don't think most parents care. Well, most probably don't care if you're like specifically a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer. They just want you to not be poor, living on the street without a home, right? They just want to make sure that you can eat and have clothes and live in a house. And so I totally get that. I totally get where all that thinking comes from. I've also met lots of people who feel like they can't pivot after the age of 25, which is absolutely ridiculous and silly and crazy. And I think part of it is finding the best path for you. Sometimes it could just be like me. I just like moved away from home. I was like, bye. And you know, there's not a lot you can say once I'm not living in the house, right? But for other people who are much closer to their family, maybe it's years of compromise, or maybe it is introducing them to your passions, or maybe it's not. Maybe a big part of it is just like you keep that separate until you can find some common ground. You know, like sometimes they're just not going to understand everything you do, and that's okay. If it's more harmful and difficult for you to try to get them on board, then maybe just don't get them on board and keep trying to do your own thing too. And I feel like my compromise with my parents was that I got a university degree. And I think they sort of felt like, you know, once I got that, it's like, hey, you're on your own. We've given you the tools to educate yourself and to get a job. The rest is on you. And so I felt like that was a pretty fair, reasonable, and quite a privileged compromise, you know, for me. And one thing I do say to people that feel like they are kind of like limited in being able to pivot or to quit a job they hate is I say two things. Like now that I'm out of my 30s into my 40s, I say two things. The first is the time for blaming your parents is over. That time is done. So if you've still got stuff you need to, sorry, that's my dog. If you still have stuff you need to work on about that, get some therapy. The second thing I say is, if you're privileged enough to be able to pursue something that you really enjoy, then you should, because there are so many people in this world who don't have the privilege of being able to find a passion to pursue, even if it's just on the side, or to, you know, have options. And I feel like if you have those options, if those opportunities are available to you, take them. Your parents came here to allow you to do that. So do it. Don't hold yourself back on anyone else's accounts. That's their greatest dream for you, is to find success and be happy. So do it. Like, that's your privilege. You take advantage of it.
I will jump in with a few notes here. I follow the motto of "You're never too old to learn." It's never too late to learn something, unless it's something physical like gymnastics. I will not do in my 40s. But I have to say I've been very fortunate that my parents have been so understanding. But like Alice has mentioned, there is a bit of proving to do, making sure that you can prove to your parents, well, at least in my situation, that I can feed myself. I didn't jump into entrepreneurship right away. It was probably a good 10 years before I did that. So I did work a full-time job, go to university, followed certain order that my parents were hoping for. But at some point, to be honest, I don't know if it's a bit of understanding on my dad's part, because I grew up watching my dad be an entrepreneur on top of working a full-time job in the early 80s, because there was recession in the 80s and he wasn't sure if he would still hold on to his full-time job. So he decided to launch his own business on the side. And he actually taught himself computer programming and coding, and he designed his own computer software for dentists with the help of a dentist friend. So, just seeing what my dad was able to do and how resourceful he was in the 80s, if he could do that in the 80s, we could do that today, given the resources and technology that we have at hand. I just can't imagine, all the tools we have accessible and ready for us to use, and just go for it.
I love it. Just go for it. That should be your new stickers. I must say, like, as I'm hearing all of you guys, I feel so much rejuvenated, and I totally agree with all of you guys. It's never too late to change. I actually changed job after spend a good 17 years within organizations and get to a point where actually get a promotion into an area I really wanted, and someone else came along and offered me something very different. And I thought to myself, am I ready to let go of my pensions and all the privilege that I had accumulated, to play it safe, to stay there in that boat that I had been for 17 years? And to Alice and all of you guys' point, sometimes you have to take that plunge, because you have to pursue what makes you happy. And you can pursue what makes you happy at age 40 and still be happy and still okay. And I have to tell you guys, after 8 months, I'm still happy as a clam, and don't think that I'm going to come back to my 17 years mothership. And you just sometimes have to pluck that courage to do those right things for yourself. Whether you have mortgage, RSP, and all those things, it will come once you're happy and healthy. Those things come after, right? I felt like I hogged all of you guys' time way too much, because you are so interesting to talk to. But I think we need to turn it over to the audience a little bit. I see the chat activity is going nonstop. So I'm going to ask Sharon if you can open up for folks to start asking questions, because I see therapists in there somewhere. Does someone want to ask some questions about therapies?
I think it's more of a suggestion on Asian and mental health. Like, those are key topics. And so maybe it'd be another Connections Cafe topic, or resource list. So we're just having a side chat over here. But yeah, let's, it's 7:02 Mountain Time. So why don't we open up the floor? Like, do people have questions? Feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. Anyone? Don't be shy. I know it's a Monday evening. No one? We've answered all your burning questions. Teresa, do you have any questions? Teresa always has questions.
No, I have not actually. I've been listening intensely and with great interest. as a fellow community activist, as a mother and grandmother. So I was busy taking my notes and enjoying the conversation. So I have not formulated my question. If I may, Sharon, if I may share some reflections, and maybe that would also spark questions or comments from others. I want to maybe share with Alice, whom I had the great opportunity to work with a number of years ago. Some of the things that you have since started doing. I actually did a Chinatown tour in 1984 when I was pregnant with my son, who is now 38 years old. So, you reminded me how, all of you reminded me how we have to continue with some of these efforts. And yet there's a difference. You know what I mean? So even though we might be doing similar activity now because it's still needed and necessary, and yet it's different. And that gives me such inspiration, you guys inspire me and encouragement. So I want to share that. And then I also want to share with Cassie and Christine birthday presents for my children in their 30s and 40s and my grandkids. I'm giving it to them on Friday because my grandkids' birthday. But what I really want to say is you have given people choices, voices, and tools. You have given me tools to connect with my grandchildren.
Thank you.
Very important. Appreciate
it. So nice of you to say.
Yeah, it has not been easy for me to actually talk to my grandchildren about their own culture. So you have given me very important tools. So I'll share that for the moment and see whether other people would like to share some of their, reactions and comments.
I'll add that truthfully, Teresa took the word right out of my mouth. I have a 9 years old. And when I show her your website, Christine and Cassie, she loves it. But she told me something that I didn't think that she could spot it at 9 years old. But she said, Mom, it looked different from the other sticker. And she's absolutely right. It's something very different, something it speaks to the culture and the background of her parents that she doesn't see in the day-to-day shop that you can see in the mall, right? So it's important to stay true to who you are and your culture. So very grateful for you guys to have that courage to bring those, to speak to the culture of Asians Canadian.
Can I just say it's so great to hear that feedback, because that was something that's so important to Christine and I, is that we wanted to create art and design that was modern and different and reflective of us. And again, just like not the stereotypical type of designs that you always see. And there's nothing wrong with that either. It just wasn't us. And, we really just wanted to do stuff that was us, and that we were confident that probably at least 5 other people out there would like we can't be the only ones here that are liking this. So to hear you guys share that feedback specifically is like really, really lovely to hear. And honestly, Teresa, I grew up 5 minutes from your house, I think. So and when I was growing up, to see your name on signs in my neighborhood when you were running for school board, it's just really neat for me to be able to sit here and have a conversation with you, because seeing Asian names in big letters anywhere was just so unseen. It was just not a thing that you would have in Calgary. And so to see your name and to see your involvement and to see that in my community, and it's been really, really neat for me to have this experience.
Well, thank you. I also want to say, even though I wanted to study fine arts and my father taught me all of it, and I became a social worker and then have done different things, it still take a different generation and different, you grew up in a very different context than I did. So I would show my grandkids, oh, this is Dragon Boat Festival, this is Mid-Autumn Festival, because that's how I was taught, right? Very instructional. But really, when you have a sticker that says "Aiya," I loved it. That's what my grandkids picked up is Wu Zhou Mao and Aiya, and that was what sparked their interest. Yeah, they would learn the festivals from grandma, but it's different, we need, yeah. So anyways, but I if I may, because it so happened we are having we're profiling 3 young entrepreneurs and activists, and also of a younger generation, and especially for the past 5 to 10 years, community activists, my generation, my age, have been thinking a lot about how to have this intergenerational conversation. We still have not figured out how to have it yet, but we all know, I've all been searching, like you, the 3 of you that have, so I just want to share that, whether it's the Japanese Canadian or Chinese Canadian, Vietnamese Canadians, we are struggling with that. And we are all thinking, but we have not really landed on how we're going to have this conversation. But since you started this conversation, thank you, Anna, for raising this intergenerational relationship topic. I'm not going to say too much. I just want to say, I think, if I may perhaps offer another perspective to from a parental perspective, is I think it's a desire for parents to want our children to be independent. It's not the kind of job. It's to be independent so that we can live at peace. Right?
Definitely speak like another mom. And I know Christine also is a mom here. It's definitely that. Like, I think I hear what Alice say, right? When my family came here, my mom's biggest desire is just make sure you go to university. She doesn't care what I study. It's just get a job so that you don't be out on the street and financially in a disadvantaged positions. And I hear myself sometimes pitching the exact same song to my 9 years old. And she actually correct me quite a few times. She's like, Mom, that's what you want. Doesn't mean that's what I want. And I'm grateful that she had that kind of independent mindset from an early age to share those perspectives with her mom. So I think, parents do want to understand their children and want to create that creativity. I think the way that we brought up a generational gap is probably those, but I would love to see more of us having those conversations with our parents, and I think I have to practice it too, and keep those conversations going, because I think to continue a lot of these traditions, a lot of value that we have, and there's a lot of great value in Asians community, a lot of great things that we know for. We need to continue to preserve some of these things, preserve what we know for best, and try to improve on what else that we're still lacking. Anyone in the chat here want to ask any questions?
I think that I'll just take the moment right now to kind of touch on that a little bit in terms of how to bridge the gap between the youth and the parent generation or the young professional generation. And I think in my volunteer work, I really try to emphasize like families doing it together, if it's community cleanup, kids doing it with adults, and making it a part of your every like weekly or monthly life. And this is why we're really trying to get more programming in Chinatown, like that goes beyond the street festival or like autumn festival and New Year's, right? Like, because people just start to think, oh, I only have to go to Chinatown or only have to talk about Chinese culture during those times. And it's really, there's thousands of years of history and thousands of years of context to talk about, right? And so I think if I were to like have one wish for I Love YYC Chinatown, it's to create and have funding to create like programs that have intergenerational aspect and where it's fun, but also educational, and giving people space to kind of talk about the topics that we've talked about. I think that a lot of times I know my cousins don't want to talk to their parents about racism, BLM, stuff like that, because they don't have the words to be able to explain it. And also it's like, okay, how do I explain like white supremacy and like all this stuff, to my parents? Like there's just so much education that has to happen, but it happens, when I talked to my parents about the George Floyd incident, it was like they were interested, like they knew that it was like a pivotal moment. It was, oh, too bad, like that sucks for them. But they weren't like, oh my gosh, like me, where it was like, we need to do something about this, like police brutality, racism, like if it's happening to him, it's happening to everybody. And then it wasn't until there was a woman in Vancouver who was like brutally dragged across the floor, you know, by a police officer. And that's when my mom, were watching the news, was like, they're doing it to us too, right? Like, it doesn't matter what color you are, where you came from, like it's, racism is racism and you are not protected. And then when the anti-Asian hate started happening, that's when it started clicking into them a little bit more, because they're like, we're not safe. Like, we checked off all these boxes and we're still not safe, and they still don't respect us, you know? And so I wish that there was more time, like, and I wish that there was more opportunities for people to like learn together as a family and to experience stuff together as a family, because it is so important. Like, you have to do it slowly over time, right? Like, I don't want it to be like a disaster happens in Calgary and that's when the community comes together and we hold a vigil and then we go home, right? Like, it should be something that we provide an opportunity to kind of build the capacity for each of us. And so whether that's through school, like when we do the Chinatown tours for school programs, like a lot of the parents come along and they're like, oh, this is so nice. Like, my kids really loved it. Like, they'll send us messages and like, we've had some really important conversations at the dinner table. But I've even had people who are like my age, very social justice oriented, very woke, and that are like, my son's in grade 1 and he's going to be on your Chinatown tour. Can you just, you know, talk about like racism and how important it is to like have, like, to be proud of where you're coming from, because he's not sure, like he's being bullied a little bit at school and he's ashamed of being Chinese, and, you know, and it's just like, even people who I would think would be able to be strong and have those conversations can't. So we're happy to be that voice. And maybe I should do like a parent training, like how to talk to your kids or whatever. But yeah, it's building capacity. It takes time. Like, it can't just happen overnight, and it's better when it's done like consistently. So that's something that I hope I Love YC Chinatown can like get into in the future.
I almost think that with my kids, sometimes often the opportunities arise when we're just watching TV or and just, you know, if that I was raised in the 80s. A lot of the movies I were fond of from back then, even in the 90s, I watch it today and cringe at how, you know, Asian actors were portrayed, and the few opportunities they had to appear in TV shows and movies. We're currently watching the TV show series Fresh Off the Boat, and it's a really fantastic series with really witty writing, and a lot of, you know, situations and scenarios arise where it gives me an opportunity to talk to my kids about what just happened. Do they understand what just happened? You know, so even that, and it's funny how, Teresa, you mentioned that the illustrations have given you an opportunity to connect with your grandchildren and your family, and it's given me the same thing with both my parents and my children. My kids will ask me about all these traditions, and collectively, because I don't know every single tradition, but we'll at least talk about it, look it up, or even ask my mom about it. So I think it's really nice to hear you say that.
Well, I think it's great that you and people who are around, who are attending this session today are doing what you're doing. I think we are all making efforts. I think to address some important issues in our society today. So yeah. If I may, I think we're getting close to the end of our time for this conversation. If I may, I just would like to respond to some of the issues raised in the conversation today. I think, Alice, you mentioned mental health, when I was in MLA, and I started in 2008, when I was actually a rookie MLA, I asked this question to the ministers as a colleague in our own caucus, and people did not answer my question. But today, I think there's more awareness about mental health, the impact of mental health, and also the impact, the experience of racialized Canadians. Our mental health, needs and issues are different. I think there's some recognition, and as part of that recognition, ACCT and the Act to End Racism Network received a grant from the federal government to embark on a research and also development of a resource, a training tool for community workers and settlement workers that link racism and mental health, and how frontline workers can provide adequate support. So that is to come. Of course, I think that we need to continue to inform our community about the importance of learning more about mental health, and also sharing our experience as one way to maintain our well-being. I see that we have some members from diversities here. And so they are actually now starting some programs, activities to educate Alice at our community about discrimination and racism. So ACCT received a government grant last year. And so in response to what you all said, our communities are not well versed on issues of discrimination, racism. We don't have the vocabulary to talk about our own experience and to talk to each other about the issues and experience. So we develop a lot of resources. But in order for our resources to come into effect, it has to reach the people. So that's what the diversity is doing, is they're actually finding ways to disseminate information into the community. So I hope that there would be opportunity for you to continue this conversation and look at how we can perhaps coordinate some of our efforts. But I think that, many people are doing their part today. And I want to take the opportunity to let you know the leadership, the identity and culture focused leadership program that we developed in ACCT. We talk about, I use clips from Fresh Off the Boat. I use clips from Eric Liu, who talk about how it's an opportunity at this moment in time to incorporate our Chineseness into our daily lives, in our leadership role in Canadian society. And you're all doing that. And, we talk about systemic racism. We talk about the importance of socialization, how our families shape how we look at, different issues. And what does our education system, our government, our media tell us who we are? When they describe us, do they describe us as leaders, or they're still saying that we're just good workers? So those are the kind of work that ACCT is trying to do. Those are the kind of conversation we're trying to facilitate, either through our training program or through our summit, which is coming up on October the 28th to the 30th. And this year, the theme is resilience and social cohesion. We'll start by having conversation with Indigenous leaders and survivors, then with Japanese Canadians who are celebrating the 80th anniversary for the internment experience, and then talk amongst ourselves about our own journeys and experience as Chinese Canadians, about leadership, about underrepresentation. So the topics this year is Chinese Canadians in unexpected places. Do you know what you don't know? And how to be comfortable in our own skin. And so those are the kind of conversation we're trying to find ways to create for Chinese Canadians. So thank you so very much to all of you for contributing to these conversations. This is early stage in for ACCT to try to create those kind of platforms and opportunity for conversation, and I hope that we'll be putting this conversation onto our website, and hopefully spark more thinking amongst Asian Canadians, Chinese Canadians about leadership, about civic leadership, having conversations about how leadership are manifested in so many different ways. So all of you here are exhibiting, leadership and in creative ways. So we want to, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell your story, so that we can actually get more people thinking about, how we can share our experience, our stories, and talk about leadership, because we do need to talk about leadership. So anyways, Sharon, did I manage to incorporate my reflection with wrapping up?
Yes, you did a great job, Teresa, as always. So thank you again, Cassie, Christine, Alice, for doing this. I know it was months in planning. I'm so glad we were able to do this. It's such a great conversation. And thank you, Anna, for jumping in last minute to help us with moderating. Always amazing as well. So the chat, I'll save the chat, but yes, I'll keep this. This will go on the website. I was thinking maybe we'll break it out so it could be like a little bit of a podcast style too, but I'll work with our IT person to figure that out. So someone asked, sorry, I just had a tickling. If we have a platform, so I do have a link on the chat. We have something called a Mighty Network where people can connect. So feel free to join. And we are looking for volunteers for the summit. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. And last but not the least, I do have an evaluation form that we'll be sending out tomorrow. So watch your email if you see it. And yes, please go, either if you're in Calgary, go do the Chinatown walk. Is it Saturday or some Sunday? Saturday?
This Friday.
This Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you guys want to purchase some amazing IES stickers and puzzles and stuff, there's the link to Cassie and Christine's site as well. And that's a wrap for us.